What if the reason your money feels like it buys less every single month has nothing to do with your spending habits and everything to do with a war being fought in boardrooms and government offices on the other side of the planet? By the end of this video, you will understand the exact mechanism silently gutting your purchasing power right now, why almost everyone is responding to it in exactly the wrong way, and the 3 specific moves that the most financially resilient people are quietly making before the rest of the world catches on. You are not imagining it. The same cart of groceries that cost you $80 2 years ago now hits $110. The appliance you budgeted for is suddenly 30% more expensive. The brand of jeans, the restaurant meal, the electricity bill, all of it creeping upward month after month. And the most unsettling part is that your salary, if it moved at all, barely kept pace. You worked just as hard. You saved when you could. Yet somehow, you feel financially further behind than you were 3 years ago. And here is what makes this particularly cruel. It is not affecting everyone equally. While average households are quietly squeezed, certain asset owners are watching their net worth climb. The gap between those who understand what is actually happening in the global economy and those who do not is widening faster than at almost any point in modern history. This is not a conspiracy. It is not bad luck. It is a structural transfer of wealth happening in plain sight, disguised as tariffs, supply chain disruptions, and political headlines that most people scroll past without a second thought. So what do most people do when they feel this financial pressure building? They cut back. They cancel subscriptions, eat out less, hunt for discount codes, maybe pick up a side hustle. And look, none of that is bad advice on its own, but here's the problem. Adjusting your consumption habits is a defensive response to a systemic offensive problem. You are trying to bail out a sinking boat with a teaspoon while ignoring the hole in the hull. The cost of living is not rising because you're spending too much. It is rising because of forces that no amount of coupon clipping will ever address. There is a reason this keeps happening that almost nobody in the mainstream financial media wants to talk about. Because the honest explanation implicates governments, central banks, and corporate lobbying in a way that makes for uncomfortable television. The purchasing power erosion you are feeling is not a side effect of the trade war. It is, in many ways, the point. And until you understand why nations use trade conflict as a tool, and who benefits when supply chains fracture, you will keep applying the wrong solutions to the wrong problem. Here's the core mechanism. When 2 major economies impose tariffs on each other's goods, the cost does not vanish. It gets passed down the supply chain and ultimately absorbed by the end consumer, you. Simultaneously, to cushion the political blowback, governments inject stimulus, central banks keep borrowing costs accommodative, and the money supply expands. More currency chasing fewer efficiently produced goods is the textbook definition of purchasing power destruction. The trade war is not just an economic dispute. It is an inflation engine with a political ignition switch. And right now, someone is pressing it hard. Look at what happened during every major trade disruption of the last century. During the Smoot-Hawley tariff era of the 1930s, families hoarded goods, savings were vaporized, and those holding productive assets or hard currencies came out the other side relatively intact. In 2018, when US-China tariffs escalated, consumer electronics prices jumped, agricultural exporters took catastrophic losses, and institutional investors who repositioned into commodity-linked assets and foreign equity markets significantly outperformed. The pattern is always the same. The informed move early, the rest react late, if at all. Here is the mindset contrast that actually matters. The average household sees rising prices and thinks, how do I spend less? The financially resilient household sees rising prices and thinks, what is driving this? Who is capturing the value being transferred? And how do I position myself on the right side of that transfer? One mindset is playing defense on a field that is tilted against them. The other is reading the tilt and repositioning before the ball even moves. The wealthy do not have better luck. They have a fundamentally different relationship with economic disruption. They treat it as information, not misfortune. Here is the single reframe that changes everything. Stop thinking of your money as a fixed store of value and start thinking of it as a position in a constantly shifting game. A dollar, a euro, a real. It is not a thing, it is a claim. And in a world where governments are actively repricing those claims through tariffs, stimulus, and monetary expansion, holding cash is not safety. It is a slow surrender. The moment you internalize that your purchasing power is not protected by default, that it requires active management, everything you do with your money begins to look different. The first move smart investors are making is anchoring a portion of their wealth to assets that cannot be printed. Hard assets, gold, silver, commodity-linked equities, real estate in supply-constrained markets have historically outperformed during periods of monetary expansion triggered by geopolitical friction. This is not about hoarding gold bars under your mattress. It is about deliberately allocating 5 to 15% of your investable assets into instruments that hold their real value when governments are forced to inflate. Think of it as purchasing power insurance, a deliberate hedge against the debasement of the currency you earn in. The second move is deliberate geographic diversification, not of where you vacation, but of where your money lives. When one nation's trade policy makes its domestic assets less attractive, capital migrates. Smart money follows that migration. Investors who are quietly outperforming right now are holding exposure to multiple currency zones, emerging markets with commodity export advantages, and economies that are benefiting from trade route realignment. This does not require an offshore account or a financial advisor in Luxembourg. It requires a brokerage account and a deliberate allocation to international ETFs or foreign currency-denominated instruments. The third move is arguably the most counterintuitive. In a trade war, the companies best positioned to survive, and often thrive, are those with pricing power and domestic production capability. Investors who are beating inflation right now are specifically targeting equities in sectors where companies can pass rising input costs directly to consumers without losing market share. Think utilities, defense contractors in neutral nations, domestic agricultural processors, and infrastructure operators. These are businesses that do not need cheap imports to maintain margins. They are structurally insulated from the very disruption that is devastating everyone else. Now here is where most people go wrong when they first understand this. They panic rotate. They dump everything into gold at the peak, or they go all in on one foreign market right when it is overvalued, or they buy commodity stocks without understanding the difference between a producer and a distributor. The second mistake is timing. They wait for certainty, for the trade war to officially escalate, for inflation data to confirm what they already feel. And by the time they act, the repricing has already happened. The third mistake is neglecting their income side. Salary is the foundation. Skills that generate income during disruption are themselves an inflation hedge. So here's what you can do this week. First, audit your current portfolio. If more than 90% of your investable assets are in your home currency and home country, you have a concentration risk that needs addressing. Second, open a position in a hard asset instrument this month, whether that is a gold ETF, a commodity index fund, or REIT exposure in a supply-restricted market. Even a 5% allocation changes your risk profile meaningfully. Third, identify 2 companies or sectors in your country with proven pricing power and begin researching them specifically through the lens of trade disruption resilience. You do not have to move everything. You have to move something, deliberately and now. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If the trade war is genuinely transferring purchasing power from passive savers to active asset holders, and history strongly suggests it is, then at what point does financial inaction become a choice rather than a default? Because right now, most people are making a decision. They just do not know it. The decision is to hold their position and let the system redistribute the value they have spent years building. So I want to know, what is the single biggest barrier that is stopping you from making these moves? And do you think that barrier is real, or is it a story you have been told?